Hi, and welcome to the Health Begins with Mom show. I am Dorit Palvanov, your host. On this podcast, I will share insights and interviews on health, parenting, and explore the question of what does it take to thrive as women, wives, and mothers. Now, let's get going with today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode in the Health Begins with Mom podcast. This is Dorit Palvanov, your host. Today on the show, I am actually so excited that this is coming to life because this has been such a long scheduling and texting and emailing back and forth adventure with somebody that actually the way it started, right, Leslie? You correct me if I'm wrong because it's been such a long time ago. You sent me an email introducing yourself, introducing your story. You found me online through one of my blog posts, and I have clicked on the video. Actually, I think it took me a week to just get to the video, and after, while I was watching the video, and you're going to tell about the story, and it's such a beautiful, heartbreaking, emotional story. I was sobbing. It was so emotional to me. You have touched my heart so much. I think your son is just gorgeous. And he's such a blessing, not just to you, but also to, the community of mothers, that are listening to the show and hopefully are going to find this online. And I wanted to have you on the show today because I want you to share your story. I want you to share your story and what it is that you do and what it is that you offer, because I believe truly that as mothers, we are healers. And what we bring, the solutions, that the problems that we solve, it matters. And it doesn't only matter for our families, our small families, but actually it matters in the grand scheme of things, because we are healing the world by doing things like what you are doing, Leslie. So today we're talking with Leslie Bienz. Is this how you pronounce your name?
It's actually Bienz.
Oh, Bienz. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I apologize. Okay. So Leslie Bienz, and I am just going to hand the microphone over to you and allow you to share your story, your beautiful, amazing story, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Well, my name's Leslie, and I'm mainly telling a story about my son, Bradley, and some things that I went through with him. To give a little background on what kind of led to this journey. My son was born almost 3 months early. He weighed 1 pound, 14 ounces when he was born. I had developed something called HELP syndrome, and he had to be delivered immediately. When he was about 2 weeks old, he was also diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. So we had a really long 165-day stay in the hospital while he was having surgeries and just all kinds of really terrible complications. He actually had 6 surgeries by the time he was 13 months old. The story actually isn't about that. It's about what happened after that. Bradley developed a feeding disorder called oral aversion because of just all the terrible things that he was on ventilators and things like that. And it's pretty common when a baby following birth has all these traumatic things happen, they become unable to eat. It's like their body kind of disconnects its connection to their mouths, and if I touched his face or his lips or anything, he would just immediately gag or vomit. So he was completely unable to eat. So he was fed through a feeding tube until right around a year ago, actually, because of that. And once he was home and his heart surgeries were over, the really terrible things were supposed to be in our past, a whole new problem developed. And that was that he just was vomiting all the time. And when I mean all the time, I mean 10 to 20 times a day. He was just projectile vomiting. He wasn't growing. When he was well past his first birthday, he only weighed 12 pounds because he just couldn't keep enough down to grow. And I had just gone to doctor after doctor. I saw dietitian after dietitian, and they did all kinds of tests. They couldn't find anything wrong to explain the vomiting. And finally, the conclusion was, well, a lot of kids that are fed by a feeding tube vomit a lot, and we don't know why. So we'll just have to wait and see if it gets better. I'm even feeling the stress just talking about this, because I can't explain what it's like to have a child that is that ill for so long. He had not even learned to sit up on his own by the time he was 14 months old, because he was truly debilitated by nausea. Every day I just kind of set him in a little nook on the couch, because it was like he would throw up a little bit less if he was there. And that's pretty much what he did. He couldn't play with toys. He just kind of like sat and stared like a zombie, because he was so miserable and so sick. And I had my kind of big day moment. Finally, I don't know, I guess I just kind of was out of my energies in dealing with this. And he threw up like he always did. And I had a baby bottle in my hand, and I threw it across the apartment and just started screaming, because I was so angry at how unfair this was, seeing other children who had been with us in the NICU who were fine and running around and eating, while my child just languished in illness. And the bottle ended up hitting a window and breaking it in my apartment. And I just sobbed and cried, and I just resolved in that moment, this can't be the answer to just wait around and see if he just magically gets better on his own. There has to be an answer to this. I can't just accept that this is how my son is going to live. So I actually did something that's kind of out of my character and very science-based. I read research studies when I'm looking stuff up, but that had not really led me anywhere. And so I just got on Google and I Googled vomiting and reflux in tube-fed children help. And I came across a really old blog, actually, that isn't even kept up anymore, that was written by a mom. And she talked about the enteral formulas that are used for tube-fed children. And I'd never really even thought about that. So this is not talking about infant formula. This is a formula that is made for children over 1 who have a feeding tube. And, I eat very natural. I had for several years prior to giving birth to my son. I always check the ingredients. And to this day, I'm just not sure why I never checked the ingredients of the enteral formula. And I guess it's just because my son was so sick in the hospital for so long. And when they told me this stuff was really great, and it was so gentle and easy to digest, but I just believe them. These were people who had been giving my son heart surgeries and things and had gotten him through some terrible crises. So it was just kind of natural to just sort of take their word for it. So I began reading on this blog. My son was essentially just surviving off the equivalent of Pediasure and nothing else, which means all of his carbohydrates were coming from sugar.
So Leslie, I'm just going to stop you here for a sec, because can you just talk a little bit about what enteral formulas are, and also what Pediasure is for those for the listeners who don't know?
Yeah, it's basically it's a beverage that you would drink. In the case of tube-fed children, they're thinking like, well, this is really watery. It'll pass through the tube really easily, and it is. Essentially, now enteral formula, you wouldn't just find that in a grocery store. It's prescribed and you pick it up at a pharmacy, or it's usually sent to you through a medical supplier. But its ingredients, and they truly are just sugar and some really unhealthful oils,
right,
protein powder, and a synthetic vitamin. And that's mixed in with some water. Kind of like infant formula, but it's just, a little bit different, and supposedly nutritionally made for older children. And if you can just imagine having just nothing but sugar for all your carbs, you would probably be throwing up too, and this has actually been the standard way of feeding tube-fed children since the 1980s. What this mom was talking about was a growing movement of parents who were rejecting these formulas. And Pediasure actually is very similar to enteral formula. It's sugar, it's oil, it's protein powder, it's synthetic vitamins, and that's really all that it is. And what people were doing was they would get a really high-powered blender, like a Vitamix, those kinds of that category of blenders, and they were blending just regular food like you and I eat, so that it would be very finely pureed, and it can fit through a feeding tube if you do that. And I read all these stories of children who had just been, violently ill while they were being fed enteral formula, and then their parents put them onto this diet of pureed food. It's called a blenderized diet is the term for that.
Right.
And they just got better. And I was just in shock. I had no idea this was an option. And it just made sense to me. Like I had solved a lot of my own, energy problems, fatigue and things like that I used to deal with through eating a healthier diet. Eating really nutritious and nutrient-dense foods, eating, just avoiding processed foods, that it just really hit me as like, this has to be the answer. Like maybe what I've been feeding him is what has been making him so sick. And I just, I don't know, I was just talking about it all the time to all my friends. I'm like, this is it, and I didn't have a Vitamix. I didn't have anything like that at the time. I had not been working for quite some time because of my son being so ill. So I just raced out to the store and got some baby food, and fed him that as a start just to see. And I fed him a whole package of baby food, and he was just completely fine. And I just was like, oh my gosh. So some friends of mine did a fundraiser to purchase a Vitamix for me.
Oh, that's nice.
So I pretty quickly transitioned to, I remember the first day that I made my son some whole grain pancakes. Like when you have a tube fed child, you've never been able to feed your child in a normal, natural way to like cook food for your child. I was just bawling the whole time because it was the first time I'd really felt like I was feeding my child, even though I was feeding him all along. You just, pouring some formula into a feeding pump and hooking your kid up kind of feels more like charging an iPod than it does actually feeding a child. It's, even though it just doesn't feel like it. And to actually cook just helped me feel like an active participant in feeding him. And I'd never had that opportunity before. So I tell people, honestly, even if that was the only benefit of a blenderized diet, I still would have chosen it just because it helped me so much in dealing with the fact that my child had this feeding disorder and could not eat. I just started feeding him lots of plant foods, lots of whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, things like that. Not 100% plant, but I would say 90% of his nutrition was coming from just really nutrient-dense plant foods, and he just completely got better. He stopped throwing up. All these toys. Sorry.
I'm getting emotional.
He had always had all these toys just sitting on the couch and would never even really touch them, or maybe he would just kind of grab one and shake it for a second and put it down. And he just all of a sudden started playing with toys and doing things that you would expect a baby to do. I mean, he wasn't a baby by then, but he was like a baby.
How old was he at that point?
He was about 15 months old. And it was the first time he was even playing with toys. So his therapist, he was, of course, he still is in a lot of therapies, physical therapy and occupational therapy and feeding therapy and speech therapy, things like that. But they just could not believe what they were seeing. I mean, he had just been completely at a plateau. We had actually had a conversation not long before that they were concerned that, because I guess I skipped part of this when I was going over his, just all the medical stuff. After his very first heart surgery, which he had when he was 10 weeks old, he had a stroke that damaged some of the right side of his brain. And at the time, the neurosurgeon said, I don't think this is going to affect his ability to learn or anything. You're just going to see he's probably going to have some asymmetry in the coordination on either side of his body. But after he'd been in therapy for so long and it just making, just no progress at all, therapists were starting to get concerned that might have been a wrong prediction. And I was starting to face that my child is going to have very long-term learning disabilities, and, nobody wants their child to have limits. I guess I just remember thinking, like, what if he wants to do something for a career and he can't do it because he doesn't have the ability or whatever. I guess that was my greatest concern. And once he got off the enteral formula and he got on a really healthy, nutritious diet, everything just changed. Everybody was like, oh, he's totally fine. He just was making great strides in his progress. So they're thinking at that time it was just completely wrong here. It was just what he was being fed that made the big difference in his development. And anyway, he learned to sit up on his own, and it's been a journey because the stroke did affect, his left side. And so he's walking with a walker now. He's 4 years old now.
But he's walking and he's eating.
Progress. Now he has no feeding tube. That's the great news. I guess that's the second part of the story is when he was feeling so much better, he wasn't vomiting anymore or anything. His speech therapist said, I really think he's at a place where he would benefit from feeding therapy. Prior to that, he'd been so sick all the time, there just really was no point, because what kid's going to eat if they're throwing up all the time, So I began looking at feeding programs, and I called to all these different ones. And they all just told me, well, just know because we were talking about what he's being fed through his feeding tube, Blenderized diets are not very widely accepted, sadly, even though there actually is a lot of research on them now and show that children pretty much across the board do dramatically better in all areas when they're being fed real food instead of the enteral formula. But I guess that's, I and a community are pushing to get that change so that Blenderized diets are more accepted. Anyway, these programs.
Leslie, sorry. I'm just going to cut you off. I'm just myself personally, I'm so curious because I am doing also the switch from being a pediatric nutritionist into health coaching now for mothers. Mm-hmm. But I have never heard about Blenderized diets before you actually talked about them. So, So can you talk a little bit about why is it that Blenderized diets are not so accepted? Is it because they're just new, or is it because there's
actually there is. So I did, this probably wouldn't be a book that's relevant to your listeners, but I did actually write a book called Stand for Food that's for parents of tube-fed children who are struggling with this. And I spent over 18 months actually just going through the scientific studies that have been done on everything around this issue. I read every relevant study on this from 1950 and forward and was just both intrigued, shocked, appalled, everything all together at what I found. So actually, all tube-fed people used to be fed pureed food. This is very well documented. It was just the norm for a very long time. Shortly after infant formula became a thing, they got the idea of, well, what if we started making this stuff for tube-fed people too? And so they started trying it. And actually, this was back in the 50s and 60s. There's a lot of articles by doctors in the 50s and 60s who did not like these enteral formulas. So these were doctors who were used to seeing tube-fed patients who were being fed pureed food. So they knew what was normal and how patients did on that. And they found that their patients had a lot more GI problems. They threw up a lot more. They had a lot more reflux. They did not recover as well from surgeries or illnesses, and they just didn't like them. And then you kind of see this change where the companies that make them stopped pushing them on doctors as being like a healthy, beneficial thing. And then the articles start talking about how they're cheaper, they're more convenient. Hospitals, you're paying kitchen staff to puree food, but you could actually just have a nurse pop open a can of this and pour it into a feeding pump bag and think of all the money that you'll save. And when that became their focus, all of a sudden, it just became more and more accepted. And then I don't know if you want me to mention company names.
No, probably not. But, if there are any links.
Companies that make enteral formula, and they did some studies that were really ridiculous. Like one of them went all the way to Iran, and they were at hospitals that had already been very well documented to have a lot of issues with contaminated food in their kitchens. And they tested the pureed food that they were making there and said, oh, look, it's really contaminated. Blenderized diets have a lot of contamination. So a lot of doctors' concerns are these two companies go and do presentations for doctors and things, and they talk about how all the bacteria that they found in blends without really giving the context under which those studies were done. And I think there's just kind of at this point, enteral formula has been the normal thing for about 30 years. So we have doctors that haven't really seen patients on pureed food to really understand the difference. They've kind of come to be taught that it's a liability. And there's a lot of doctors that have never heard of blenderized diets. It's kind of shocking to me now. But I will say, I have a Facebook group that of moms that are doing blenderized diets of almost 10,000 people now. We're really a growing movement to kind of get back to what we were doing in the first place with tube-fed people. And as the medical profession, I mean, my son's team was concerned about me doing this, but now when they saw the difference in him and his growth chart is just unbelievable, where you can just draw a line and see right where I started feeding him food and in all of his therapeutic treatments and stuff and how much he was progressing. Now they're all on board, and that's kind of what's happening is once they can actually see, okay, this kid didn't get harmed by this and actually are doing very well, they're kind of slowly becoming convinced that this is the right way. So I guess that's kind of a long answer to your question.
Yeah, it just boggles my mind how many times I hear the same story of the mom being the one that brings the message of health into the home. The ones she is obviously, because you have such a high stake at this situation.
Right.
And not to say that, doctors don't. It's just because I feel like because we're so motivated to actually help our kids heal so that they can have a good life and also us.
Right.
That's, it explains our motivation.
Well, and that's really that's one of the discussions we have in our community a lot is it's one thing as a doctor to have a parent bring their child in and say they're vomiting. It's a completely different experience to be the mother of that child who is being debilitated by nausea. And at the end of the day, maybe you can convince some doctors that this is a liability, make them worried or whatever. But when you're the mother of a child who is sick, none of that stuff matters. You just know this isn't working. My child has to get better. So I do feel like there were these efforts to kind of convince the medical profession, and then the next step would be that they would convince mothers, and that just didn't really work because mothers aren't going to sit around and watch their child vomit all day when they know that there's a better answer. When their child is 15 months old and can't even sit up and is nowhere near, that's not acceptable to me. And not that, like you said, it's not because it's acceptable to the doctor, but they're not living it every, day in and day out. It's just a different experience. It is. It's really what's driving this whole movement is moms who have seen the difference. They're showing it to the medical team, and things are changing. We are seeing, it's slow and going, but you see the wave kind of moving across where more and more dietitians and doctors are becoming accepting of this. I know my son's hospital actually changed their entire formula for tube-fed people and their protocol because of my son. Like that's how profound it was. So, they do care. And when they see that this is safe and this actually is better, then they're slowly responding. And I do believe we're going to see the day that a blenderized diet is the default diet for tube-fed people.
Right, because it makes so much sense. This is food versus chemicals.
I mean, it's what everybody else in the entire world eats. It's like it's kind of funny to think, how did you become so convinced this was dangerous when you eat food yourself? So.
Right, and it's like I think in my community, at least of moms who are on a healing journey and are changing their diet and balancing their hormones and whatnot. I mean, drinking smoothies, it's a part of what we do.
Right.
So why would it be something that can harm a child who clearly needs nutrients, like real food from the ground, food that was designed to heal and sustain us? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. And you know, on my last interview, I interviewed somebody who talked about herbs and botany, and about how plants are designed to help us heal. And she told me that, well, you and I know that, but she said the reason why this is not more widely spread is because the pharmaceuticals and the big corporations, they don't want us to know, because there's no money in that. There's no money. And especially I feel like with products like Pediasure or, you know, other, what they call them, meal replacement shakes, what the benefit I think for corporations is it's the recurring component, right? It's just because, you know, once the kid is hooked, and yeah, it's clearly you see that, you know, there are some improvements. That's it. You know, it's almost like you have to keep buying that product.
Because that's really all that the child has learned to eat.
Right,
you know?
right.
And that's the thing with Blenderized Diets. No pharmaceutical company is going to make any money from me going to the grocery store, you know, and feeding myself some beans, or my son some beans and rice. So of course they're not going to advertise that, or you know, they get.
So that's why, Leslie, I wanted to have you here, because it is a quite extreme case, but I wanted, you know, the moms who are listening to the show, to really see the power that we have. And I mean, Leslie, not only you have helped heal your son, and I'm sure you're still working on that, and you know, every day is a new adventure for you guys, but not only have you helped to heal him, you actually have helped to change the trajectory for the hospital. It's like, this is huge.
Yeah.
And I hope you can see that.
Oh, I do. I guess for me, I feel proud of my son, because he's the one doing the really hard work. And I know it's hard work for me too. I guess, you know, when you're talking about your listeners, you know, obviously if you have a child that's fed orally, you probably are not having any doctors tell you don't ever feed your child food, don't ever feed, you know, to only ever feed Pediasure. But I guess getting back to when I began seeking for him to receive feeding therapy, the clinics were all telling me, you know, well, he's not going to be able to learn to eating food. He's going to have to drink Pediasure. We're going to do things like pudding. And, you know, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for people who are dealing with children that have, you know, struggling with oral aversion and things. And what I saw was kids that would go through programs like this, they were very fixated on these foods. So, I mean, I know moms that their kids will not eat food. They will, like, they got off their feeding tube, but they only drink Pediasure. And, you know, sugar is so powerfully rewarding to children. They get a huge, I mean, we all do, but children even more so get a huge endorphin rush when they eat sugar. And endorphins give you like a very pleasureful feeling in your brain, that it can have a very powerful hold on our kids. And when I thought about it, and they were just so insistent that, you know, he's not going to be able to transition off of his feeding tube onto this healthy diet that you want, it's hard to just go completely against a whole group of professionals saying this to you. But the more I thought about it, I talked to other moms who said that they had regretted that now they didn't know how to get their kid off this into eating it. I just decided, you know, I just don't want that for my child. And I'm going to have to find a feeding program that will work with me on this. And it was hard work. And I actually, the feeding therapist I did find was not really in favor of it, but she was willing to allow me to try. We went through that process, and I mean, I taught Bradley to eat using fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans. Those were his very first foods. He ate green beans. He ate all kinds of stuff that, you know, that many children struggle to have. I think one help that helped me was I actually used to work in pediatric mental health prior to giving birth to my son. And I worked with children who were institutionalized with very severe behavior disorders that had resulted from really, really terrible traumas that had happened to them. Without getting too far into that, because those are lots of other sad stories. But I had a lot of experience. Like, these children really needed help healing their relationship with people, with the world, and even with themselves, and walking through them with them on their journeys of healing, I really started to think, what if, even though this was a different situation, it still was about healing a relationship. And maybe the same principles would apply. My son's relationship with food had been terribly, terribly damaged because of all these traumatizing things that happened to him. So what if I applied those same principles to helping my son? And I did that. I never coerced him. I never bribed him. I allowed him to explore food on his terms in the way in which he felt safe. And it worked. I mean, my son has never drank Pediasure. I've never even, had it in my home. He gets treats every once in a while, but they're more like healthy type things, like, like homemade bars, maybe with dates and things like that. But he eats a primarily plant-based diet. He eats a really wide variety at age 4 of nutritious foods. And it just took the process and the patience of doing that. And it did work. And now, I've had a lot of other parents emailing me saying, how did you do this? And I'm seeing other children too, not necessarily just kids with feeding disorders, but with just picky eating in general. And their parents are just not sure how to address that. And we walk through the principles, and they're, it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes work, but it can happen. And if you feel like your kid's stuck on 5 foods, and they're not the foods you'd really prefer they be eating, it can just be very overwhelming and make you feel very hopeless. But it can happen, and you can help your child to eat a wider variety of foods, and the kinds of foods that are going to benefit their body. And
Leslie, I'm so happy you brought the component of the holistic component to healing. I wanted to ask you this question, but then I thought, oh, what if she doesn't get it? And I'm so happy you brought it in, because that's something that I am very, very passionate about. One of the things that I talk to my clients when it comes to healing and their healing journey, it's this, the notion, because a lot of my clients are healing from emotional eating in the past and even currently. And one of the things that I mention in my work with them is that food is life. If you think about it psychospiritually, food is life. And so just like you said, those kids who are having this, having their relationship with food so damaged, like you have, like your son had, what is it about food that doesn't sit with them, that causes their body to reject food? And so I'm so happy that you went and you were courageous enough to go into that direction, because many times that's where, at least at the beginning, lies, right? It's like, oh, it makes total sense that my son, after having so many surgeries, after having so many scary, things inserted into his body, even if he was under sleep, our soul is never asleep. Our soul is always very much present and very much is aware of the things. And fear for little kids it's their most primal feeling. And I think that's where our job as mothers is so important. That's where you really have to, I feel like for you, this experience really helped you to level up and to really put your big girl pants on and show up for your son, because this is serious stuff. I mean, for us, for people who thankfully don't struggle with, such difficult things, but I can even bring my own example. When was it? Like 4 months ago, my daughter just got off of a cast. She went through a very major surgery, a hip surgery. She was diagnosed with hip dysplasia. This is a completely different story. I'm not even going to talk about the fact that 2 pediatricians told me that she's totally fine. And I, as a mom, just like you, I felt like something was wrong. I think I'm going to do a separate podcast about this, because this is a very interesting, fascinating story.
Yeah.
But anyways, she went through the surgery. She was in a body cast for 8 weeks. And after that, here I was, so naive of me, thinking that, okay, so we're going to remove the cast and we're just going to get back right into life and everything is going to be like it didn't happen. And oh boy, was I wrong.
Right.
I didn't even consider the consequences of something major like that. Like, for example, one of the things that I've noticed is that my daughter completely started ignoring her body. She didn't want to touch herself. She didn't, potty training, she is 2 and 4 months and she's not even interested. It's like she almost like ignores. She doesn't want to kind of put awareness back into that area of the body. And so I didn't even go to the doctor because I know what he's going to tell me. She's fine. She's going to grow out of it, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to hear that story. So what I started doing is I started giving her something that is called body work. Yes, she's just 2. Body work is something that is done for kids who go through sexual trauma. Mostly. It's basically, touching their body, almost like getting that feeling, the body mind feeling again, and just helping them, almost like reacquaint with their older self again. So this is just an example of how, as mothers, we do have power. We do have power, and we can help our kids heal. Even if, your son was destined to, it is unfortunate to go through, so many heart surgeries and so many really challenging, challenging things, really. But what you have done is really, really big. And I know you keep putting it on your son, and I am very, very proud of your son, but I really hope that you see the work that you have done, because this is really, really big.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do hope it does empower other moms to see that this is something that you can do for your child. You can help them through this. They can do it. You can do it. It's not this hopeless situation where you're just stuck catering to picky eating or whatever the case is, something like this even,
right.
Where your child's been through something kind of traumatizing or whatever, and you can feel like, well, something I can do, or I don't know what to do, but you do have that ability to help your child heal and recover, and it takes time and it takes patience, but you can do it.
Right. I have so many questions. My first question is, it sounds like your life literally stopped. I can't even imagine, how do you, like marriage or like relationship, or even like having a life, a career, like how does that, what happens there for you when you are having such a challenge with your son?
Wow. Things really changed for me just overnight. I'm actually a single mom, so that was definitely an added component, that I did go through that journey pretty much by myself. I was working through my pregnancy and everything, and I went to an ultrasound one day that was supposed to just be a routine check, and the baby was not getting a normal flow through the cord, and I was just immediately hospitalized from there. And I left work that Saturday night, this was on a Monday. I had no idea I was not going to be heading back on my normal work schedule, which began on Wednesday. And, that issue actually kind of resolved, but I was sent home on bed rest. And then, a few weeks went by, seemed like everything was fine. I was even considering maybe I can go back to work and keep working till I have the baby like I had planned. And then I just woke up one day, had this terrible pain under my right shoulder blade, and that just changed everything. I went to labor and delivery, and now I have this very sick baby. I've yet to go back to my job. I do little things on the side here and there, but everything just becomes about your child. A lot of my hobbies, a lot of my friends, like we used to have these weekly bonfires or whatever, and I haven't been to one since my son was born. I've been around my friends some, but it changes all your relationships. It's getting a little better now that Bradley's getting more independent. He's not needing as much therapy. So I feel like I'm kind of a flower blooming once again out into the world. Because it's a very isolating experience to sit with your baby in the hospital for 165 days, even just leaving the hospital to go walk around Target for a little while. Just, I really can't even explain the feeling of, because you almost feel like you're in prison in a sense, because you're just in this same spot all the time. You sleep on the couch there next to your sick baby, you sit in the chair all day next to the crib, and it's just that even just that experience outside of the medical traumas is pretty traumatizing.
I mean, motherhood is challenging, and that brings it to a completely different level. But I think as mothers, we can all relate to the
I mean, a lot of things in your life tend to go, and it takes a while to get them back. But fortunately, you know, I have really wonderful, beautiful friends who have understood that I can't be around as much right now, and we text, we do different things to just help stay connected as we can. I definitely learned and this would be a good lesson for any mom, whether you have a special needs child or not. By probably about the time Bradley was 2 years old was the point where I felt like I was starting to go crazy, because I had really just, my entire life had been around either being in the hospital with my son, or when he came home, we were constantly in therapies or doctor's appointments, or, you know, like, it's not like he only gets physical therapy when we're at physical therapy. I have things I'm supposed to do with him daily at home. That was literally 100% of what I was doing. I wasn't doing anything for myself. And you can only do that for so long. Whether you have a perfectly healthy child or not, it's easy to fall into that, where you kind of just lose your own identity. And, well, now I'm a mom, and so everything is about my child. And if you do that, then you actually are not going to be as good of a mother, based on my experience anyway, than if you take time to do things for yourself, to kind of feed in and build up yourself. So at the time, you know, I was kind of limited. When I came to this realization that I had not done a single thing that was for me for 2 years, and then no wonder I was just going crazy, and, you know, felt terribly depressed and just isolated and lonely. And I was kind of limited in my options for, like, what could I do? A lot of my hobbies involve, like, being out and about or doing things that just were not really possible.
Realistic,
and I think, you know, a lot of moms have to do that. There's things that you love to do that, you know, when you have, especially when your kids are younger, you just can't do. So I had to find something else that would be for me, you know? And so I love to cook. I love to try, like, new foods. And so we were at home a lot. We couldn't be out a lot because of my son's immune system couldn't be around a lot of germs at that time. So I decided, you know what, every month I'm going to explore ethnicity of cuisine. So I would, like, one particular month, I read all about Japanese food, and I made myself all Japanese food for just all these different things I'd never tried. You know, and it was kind of two birds, one stone. I had to cook for myself anyway. So I just made it more interesting and fun. And it really, really changed things for me on an emotional and mental level, to do something that was just for me, that was for me to have fun and to have a good time. And I was able to then put more energy into my son, because I didn't have the depression and isolation and all of that, being drained all the time. And I think that would apply to any mom. You know, if you have to give up some of the things you loved on a temporary basis, then find new things that will work with your life, to just sort of invest in yourself. And it's okay to do that. You don't have to always be giving to your children 100% of the time.
Even in a case of a special needs child, right? And I love how we are. I mean, it is an extreme for most of us, but I mean, this is clear. And I love that, because that was my next question for you, actually. I love that you're talking about this. You know, finding these non-negotiables, the things that are nourishing your soul and your body, that you know that they fill up your cup, so that then you are able to give you know, energy or attention or whatever it is that you need to give to your loved ones, to your kids, to your, you know, anybody else who needs, you know, things from you. I wanted to ask you about, it sounds like cooking for Bradley was like an over-consuming endeavor. Like you said, like 100% of the time, that's all that I was doing. So how are you coping with that? With so that, with the fact that all of the things that you were doing was all about him. How did you cope with, let's say, maybe you can share some of the tips and tricks, or how did you make or help yourself make some of the things more sustainable and easier for yourself, or if even?
I guess it's kind of a hard question, because a lot of things, I guess I feel like some things in my lives have not been sustainable. I've just been kind of pushing along. I mean, as far as like the cooking, that's something I had to do. I think just finding joy in that instead of seeing it as a chore or a burden, even though that didn't really save me any time, it definitely made the experience different. I think that was probably easier for me to do because of the component that I had not really been able. I'd never cuddled up with my baby and fed him from a bottle. I'd never done those things and longed for that. So it's probably easier for me than probably most other moms would to find in that. But if you can find a joy in what you're doing, driving downtown for my son to go to physical therapy, and there's, I live in Chicago, there's all kinds of traffic trying to get down there. It can, I can either let myself get annoyed that we're rushed as always, and, or just accept, what, we're going to get there when we get there. And if we're 15 minutes late, then we're just going to be 15 minutes late. And being upset, being stressed, allowing all this anxiety is not going to improve the situation. So let me just put on some music while I'm sitting here stuck on Lakeshore Drive and with the cars not moving, and we'll just enjoy some music. My son loves to sing. I actually really love music. And, if you like something else, you could put on the podcast here, or you could, whatever. Just, I think it is just about being conscious of our feelings.
Yeah.
Knowing what is worthy of our stress and what is not, and where is anxiety going to push me to improve a situation, and where is it in an unchangeable situation, so there's really no purpose for it. And so let me just find something else to focus on. So I don't know if it's really about,
I think it's about mindset.
What you do, as it is changing your awareness of how you're feeling. Mindset. Sometimes you can be very anxious or angry and you don't even really know. But if you take the time to just take some introspection, how am I feeling right now? And is this really justified? Is this going to make my day better? And if it's not, then do something different that will, alleviate some of that. So I guess it is more about just emotional awareness and what we're experiencing throughout the day.
Yeah. It sounds like this experience really taught you to master your emotions. I talk about emotional mastery a lot in my practice, because at the end of the day, we are human feelings. And that's, a lot of the decisions and the things that make us move through life are ignited, or are what's the word I'm looking for, are started by some kind of an emotional feeling, right? So it sounds like you really, and I also, another thing I love about what you're saying is that it all comes back to mindset. And it sounds like through this process, you really, really need to have a growth mindset, as opposed to a mindset that is like, it's not really lack mentality, but it's more of like a victim mentality of like, why me? It's not fair, da 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 da. And the road is really, it's a very slippery slope from there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I've been there, especially when my son was younger. It's very easy to start feeling sorry for yourself. Why did this have to happen to my son? Why couldn't it have happened to somebody who's rich and has all kinds of resources and, whatever? You start thinking things like that. Then you start feeling like everything in your life is terrible. And you're right. You can really start to descend into a very negative space. And I will admit, I had moments where that's really where I was. And I just, I think it, kind of getting back to my career before, Bradley was born, those kids that I worked with had been through so much, and I tell people, I helped them a lot, but I learned a lot from them too on, a lot of these were kids that they didn't even have parents anymore. I mean, they were just, you've mentioned being 8 and 9 years old and having to live in a facility where everybody in your life is not going to be in your life in a year or two. And, that would be frightening for me as an adult, let alone as an 8 or 9 year old child, and seeing their courage to move forward with their life really impacted me. And I do feel like those were things that I carried then into my journey with my son. And when I got into a really dark, negative space, that was what helped me climb out of that, is all the things that I would tell them. You can't keep focusing on, even though this is really, really bad, it sucks, but you can't just think about that all day, or you're never going to be happy. And don't you want to have a happy life? And I had to kind of just, almost like conversations I had with these children, I had to have with myself. Like,
right.
This does suck that this happened. It's unfair. It's all of those things, but you can either dwell on that and live in that, or create a new space for yourself. Like, it is as it is. Obviously, if I had the choice, I would have preferred my child not to be born premature and to not have had this heart defect. But he does. And I would have preferred him not have a stroke, but he did. And so we just deal with that, and we celebrate the moments. This past Wednesday, actually, Bradley took his very first independent steps without a walker or anything. And, in a way, I kind of see it as every mom feels joy when they see their mom take, their child take their first steps. But that, when you've spent 3 years daily working hard for that moment,
right.
I have experienced, sadness and despair that maybe not everyone else has had to experience, or some others haven't. But I also get to experience like the same, I guess I try to explain it as the intensity of despair that I felt when my baby was sick. I now get to experience that intensity in joy. It means so much more to me that my child is learning to walk independently. And so I focus on that. Like, I get to experience more positive emotions that maybe someone else doesn't have the opportunity to now have.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Leslie, thank you so much for sharing. I still have a few more questions, and these questions are more, I think this whole conversation have been so like vulnerable and raw. And
yeah,
I'm really grateful for your honesty. So my next one is about some of the vision that I'm gonna say it a different way. I want to know about, what is your vision for your life? What are you creating? What is your life's purpose? Given everything that has happened, what is the new possibility that you are seeing, and how are you creating change?
Well, a couple years ago, I started a blog that was really just meant for helping parents with a child with a feeding tube feed a blenderized diet. And I really did not have the expectation that would go anywhere. I just thought, I bet there's a need for this. It was clear that was a need. And I thought a couple hundred people would come to it, and it would really be great. And that would be the end of it. At this point, I've had over 50,000 people come to that blog. The book that I mentioned, Stand for Food, has really been a lot more impacting than even my highest hopes. It's actually being translated into German right now, because a lot of German hospitals are wanting it so they can reevaluate their protocols for feeding tubes. So that's a very big part of my life. Even though my son does not have a feeding tube anymore, I know how important this issue is, and it's a path that opened up in front of me, and I have to walk down it, because there's, even children living with feeding tubes now. That's like my son, and I can't just turn away from that. That has also grown into, when I shared a little on my blog about my son learning to eat and overcoming his oral aversion without the use of sugary sweets and things like that, I started to have parents that don't have a child with a diagnosed feeding disorder, but they do struggle with picky eating, email me, and I would just kind of help them walk through that process, And then they would tell their friends, and then I just had more and more people emailing me. So definitely, as when I was 15, 16 years old and imagined my life right now, I thought I'd be doing something totally different. But really right now, my mission in life is just to help children get on a healthier diet, to be eating more nutritious foods. I really focus on plant foods. I don't think everybody has to eat 100% plants, but I do think a large portion of our diet, we benefit when we eat a lot of plants because they're just so nutrient dense. And it can be hard to get your children to eat those foods. So, and I hear the struggles of parents, and they want their kids to eat better. They just feel overwhelmed. They're not sure what to do. And so that's kind of just what I'm doing. It's just helping parents help their kids eat more nutritious food, eat more plant foods, and guiding them through that process. And those two things really are consuming probably the larger portion of my life these days. But it really is amazing to see these parents transform, to remember, our first conversations, and then, months later to see where they're at now, where they're so empowered and things are going so great. Even the TubeFeed community, just seeing parents coming, going, my son's doctor doesn't want me to try this. I'm so scared. I'm so nervous. And now they're like ambassadors for Blenderized Diets, giving presentations at hospitals and everything else. It's just, I love it. I'm so passionate about it now. And
that's beautiful. Thank you. My next question is, what advice, and that's a big one, what advice does your now mom self would have given to your pre-mom self?
Oh, wow. I guess that's a thinker. If I could go to myself back then, I guess it would just be to find the joy in each day. If I could have done that from the beginning after my son's birth, if I could have done it even before I ever got pregnant with my son. There's a lot of things in this life that just kind of distract us. Cars break down, things go wrong. Managing a budget and just, unexpected occurrences coming up, things like that. This life really does have a lot of positive things. I can say, if I can sit here and say, my son has a heart defect, my son had a stroke, my son is 4 and he can't walk, and yet I'm very happy. And every day, I do find tremendous joy in something. Then surely myself back then could have done more of that had I just really understood. When you're having a really bad day, when, and it's not like special needs parents are the only ones that have hard days. Everybody does. So just find something very joyful in your day, and it will make those bad things be dealt with a lot easier. I'm so happy now. I'm a much happier person than I was before I had my son, because of all the things that I've learned and all the ways that I've grown, and just always, I still have growth to do. And, to not forget that, to just focus on growing as a person instead of feeling like, well, I kind of am the way I am and reach this plateau, because you're really going to miss out on a lot if you do.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, all the links to everything that Leslie mentioned today are going to be down below in the show notes. So please go ahead and check them. Leslie, my last question for you is, I like to keep it real and show listeners that even though someone is an expert, it's so hard for me to say, but you are an expert in what you do. But I'm sure there are other things that you still struggle with. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you are still currently are challenged with, just so that we get even more a peek into your, your life?
Well, for all my advice for make sure you feed into yourself, I do struggle finding time with that. Especially, I will say lately, it's actually been even harder. I guess I should have mentioned this in your previous question, but I am writing a book series for children to help them learn to eat more plant foods, more nutritious foods. And that is consuming a lot of my time. And I feel like, by the time I take care of my son, by the time I've invested in that, it's 2 a.m. and well, now what? I'm not going to get up and make myself Japanese food. What should I do or whatever? But I definitely, I do feel like at this moment, my life is a little out of balance. I'm neglecting some of the things I've been telling moms to do right in this very interview. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what have I been doing for myself lately? And I can't think of anything because I'm working on these books and I'm taking care of my son. And I've definitely been eating a lot of oatmeal lately because you can just microwave it. So I'm not keeping up with cooking the way I normally do. Yeah, that's definitely been a struggle as all this has been going on. So in a way, it's almost like what's been so great, this vision that I'm pursuing is brought all these wonderful things to my life, but it's also brought some struggles too, with just keeping up with taking care of myself too. Because now I feel like I'm helping take care of a lot of other children besides my sons.
Right.
So
yeah. What is one thing you are committing to doing just for yourself?
Boy, I guess that shows how much I'm struggling with this because I can't just have a quick answer to that. I do think I need to get back to cooking meals from scratch. I really love to do that. It's healthy for us too, but some people, they just do it because, they know it's good for them and they do it. I actually receive joy from doing that. I enjoy cooking, not so much the washing the dishes afterwards, but I think that's something I have sacrificed. I feel like I'm eating well, but I'm not cooking, if that makes sense. And I need to get back to doing that because I really do enjoy that. And these last few weeks, I really haven't been doing that very much. So
amazing.
To all the listeners, I'm committing right now. I'm going to pull this food out of the freezer I threw in there.
That's your challenge. I love that. I love that so much. Please keep nourishing and taking care of yourself because we need you. Your son needs you, and all the other parents who are struggling and all the kids who are struggling, we need you. We need you to take care of yourself. Thanks. Leslie, thank you so much for everything. Oh, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been definitely one that has opened my heart. Can you, before I let you go, can you please talk about your books? I feel like every day you're writing a new book.
Yeah, I do too. I told them I have so many projects going on right now. I can't even manage.
Can you please?
Sure. Let me just real briefly. I'll just touch on what I have. So
so you talk about talk about before you go ahead. I want you to mention those links for the Blenderized meals coaching that you do, and then the other website that you have, and then maybe I'm for sure I'm gonna link to Bradley's stories, the YouTube video that you sent me.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and then the link, I'm going to attach the link for the TubeFeeding book that you've written, and also there's going to be the link for your closed Facebook group. So if there's anything else that you want to mention, now is the time.
Okay. Well, I'd like to just briefly talk about my book series. The goal is at the end is there would be a set of books you could buy for an infant, and there will be books from this series for them to read with their parents as they grow all the way until they graduate from high school. At the moment, I have one picture book for children age 0 to 3. We have an illustrated picture book for kids like around age 4 to 7, called Tom Turnip's Plant Foods Adventure. Our big focus right now that we're trying to get out is, actually it's a friend of mine. When I say we were writing these books together, is a fantasy series called The Quest. And the books are not about healthy eating. It's more that positive messages about eating nutritious foods are kind of weaved into the story. If you want to give a check to just see if this sounds like something, these are more for kids like age. We've had some third graders reading it all the way up to like age 14 or 15. So, and actually I've had a lot of adults read them too and love them. So, but they're called The Quest. You can find them at crunchytubymamabooks.com. There actually is a free ebook. Our first book in the series is free. It's also available as an audiobook just for you to try it out and see if you like it. And if you do, there's Amazon links on my website there. I also have some nonfiction books and books for adults on there. I guess the one nonfiction book I'd like to mention is called Your Prehistoric Mother and You. And this is really all about how our inner biological drives are impacting our children's feeding behaviors where we don't even realize it. And what's kind of going on in our children biologically, like when we talk about picky eaters and why they won't try new foods or things, it kind of explains why that is. And the bottom line is it really comes down to we have a biological system that came about in times that are very different than today's modern world, and they kind of clash. And by becoming aware of all of that, you just kind of become empowered to apply some principles to help your child eat some, a wider variety of food. That's available on Amazon. You can also find that at crunchytubymamabooks.com. And then if you really, really are struggling with picky eating, you feel like you need more support, I do have a program called Modish Mealtimes that is kind of founded on the principles in the book I just mentioned. So you could check out that website too. It's just modishmealtimes.com. And this is just basically me taking everything that I learned through my son's feeding disorder and how to get him off of a feeding tube without using these, less nutritious foods, to help other parents then help their children increase the variety of foods that they're eating. I think that pretty much, if you do have a child with a feeding tube, or if you know someone who does, there's actually a website called crunchytubymama.com that is all just specifically about tube feeding and help with that. And there's a lot of resources on there that are completely free. And then I do offer an additional service if people need more individualized attention than what they can find on my website. So I know I'm talking about 3 different things going on here. Kind of depends on what you're looking for. You could check those things out.
Yeah, I'll definitely, and I'm scrolling through crunchytubymamabooks.com, and I love everything that I see. I'll definitely link up to all of that. Is there are you present? Are you on social media other than Facebook?
Yeah, I am actually on Instagram and Facebook. I have an author page on both of those. It's just CrunchyTubyMama. Obviously the Tuby Mama part came from everything that I went through with Bradley.
Right.
And everything is kind of launched from that. So that's the name of the blog that I first started, and I just kind of kept with that because it just by then kind of seemed like everything fit well with that. So
right. Great. Leslie, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you for what you've done and doing for your son, for what you are doing for all the families that are out there who need so desperately, I think that's the word, desperately, what you have to offer. I definitely have so many people coming my way who are looking for solutions, and I'm happy to have somebody like you, and I'm happy to refer them to you. So thank you so, so much from the bottom of my heart for showing up for yourself, for your family, and for the world.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Health Begins with Mom show. I love hearing from you, so please post your comments and questions over at healthbeginswithmom.com/podcast. If you love the show, please share it on social media and in your real life with other moms who might enjoy this content. And if you have a burning question or topic you'd like me to hit on the show, just drop me a line at dorit@healthbeginswithmom.com. And if you love this show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Much love and many blessings.